Ready Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. We have the Winter Raph unit release this week, both to JP and Global. This will be a very interesting deep dive to really analyze the character that we have no real data on previously, so let's jump into things. Today, the character overview, where we get our first snapshot of some of her major attributes, the base and total stat analysis, looking at her compared to other characters, leading up to the report card, where we can grade those attributes, again, relative to the game and its current state. We'll then hyper-focus on the general thoughts and things I really think you should know. We'll go through the passives, counters, job abilities, auto priority, just to kind of quick hit some things and back up my thoughts on the report card and general thoughts. The TMR review, the job-based vision card eligibility, weapon optimization, and then some sample builds just to look at some stats and some Truststones. So, brand new character, added as a lightning unit to the game. They gave her the unique main job of Magi Striker with the Supplicant and Rune Knight subjobs. She equips maces, hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 70 cost unit. Now, Faith recommendation is absolutely 97%. She's a magic-oriented damage dealer, so you have to have that stat at that place. From a job perspective, her max range is 6 squares away, so a little bit long there in terms of maybe getting baited earlier than you would like. She does have 2 AoE abilities and 2 single-target abilities on the main job. From a resistance standpoint, she's at 35% magic res here, and part of that is due to her dream ability that gives her the 15% extra. But other than that, relatively mundane, if not below average, resistances otherwise. It's 10% to slash, 5% to pierce, and then minus 10% to missile and minus 5% to pierce. So kind of balanced there on those predominantly physical damage types. Now, being a 97 faith unit and the magic meta we're in, we absolutely have to be conscientious of the status element resistances, and she's got 50% to sleep, which is a godsend for the Helena meta currently, 50% to slow and 10% to confusion, which is kind of a mirror to her own status elements that she can give to others. The mastery ability, they went a little bit light here, only 20 magic res pen for that mastery ability, and the dream ability, they throw an extra 15 AoE res. So overall, it's in a pretty decent starting spot. You can already see she's being primed to be an anti-magic unit, and she does that job exceptionally well. But for now, the stats, base HP definitely above average here, above that 75th percentile. Nothing crazy, relatively in line with the 3rd anniversary units, but bottom line is pretty strong base HP, particularly for a magic damage dealer. Now, for base magic, she's definitely in this second tier here. Really not a bad spot for magic stat. On this chart on the bottom left, it might look like she's a little bit behind other units, but realistically speaking, if you're 400 plus, you're in a pretty good spot for base magic. For base agility, again, this is not the end of the story when we get to total agility. Most characters fall in this range of 53 to 58, so nothing too crazy. She's at 55, kind of right in the middle, neither good nor bad. Base agility is okay. Base dexterity is the real big first weakness, though. We see this with a lot of 70 cost units, that this is the one stat they tend to skimp on the most. She's one of the worst base dexterity units in the game, only 170. So her crit rate, because of that, is going to be near non-existent, practically speaking, unless you really do things to amplify it. And the base luck, though, is above average here. She's definitely above that 75th percentile. This is a great thing. Not that she's a hyper-accurate unit. She's not. Not that she's a hyper-evasive unit. She's not. But base luck is a really strong stat. They gave it to her here, keeping her in this above average bracket. Now, as we transition those charts into this one to kind of snapshot all of those stats relative to other characters, again, dexterity is really the only one that stands out as a weakness. When you incorporate the board nodes, the mastery ability, things of that nature, the only real shifts you see here are the magic stat taking a step back. And part of that is because for her board node, every character gets 1 board node of a percentage increase. Most damage dealers get their primary stat. So in this case, most magic units get a magic stat buff. They did not give that to her. They gave her 15% HP instead. So she doesn't end up relatively bulkier than most units, all things considered. The rest of the stats are okay. I really wouldn't consider them weaknesses, but that magic stat, unless you're really hyper investing in it, she will be slightly below average in that regard. Now, for the agility, when you start equipping the 15% and 8% vision cards and min-maxing what they can with passives, she does have a passive that you'll have equipped almost all the time, so you would want to look at her on the context of this green line, which is comparing her to all of the units with their passive abilities equipped. She comes in at average of 81, and if you're kind of bucketing here, again, maybe slightly above where many of these characters tend to be grouped, but in terms of just statistically speaking, at 81 is exactly average with other units with passives equipped, so she's competitive, not necessarily a strength of hers though. We look at the crit hit. Again, same story here. The dexterity stats very low. No crit hit rate board notes. She ends up being very below average for a potential critical hit rate. The crit avoidance is relatively average too. It looks bad on this chart because there's so many units that they've given special buffs to for it, but really and truly 54% here in the middle is basically average, not a weakness at all, just average. Now for the accuracy, I do think the passive ability I recommend has a 20% accuracy buff on it, so I would think of her in the context of this green line, which again is the stats with passives equipped. She's a step below some of these tiers of really accurate units. I wouldn't call her an accurate unit, but she's definitely got a leg up compared to most other characters in the game. The bottom line is, I don't think she's going to hit evade units, but I think she's going to have a better chance against some of these cheeky evasion teams that are not supposed to be, but they're just kind of getting away with it just barely because no one's equipping for it. So I think that's a good thing overall. The evasion herself, she's technically average from a percentage perspective, right on the very bottom of that gradient. I wouldn't expect her to evade anything, but if you're min-maxing, theoretically, you can make it happen. Now for the report card, the effective HP here, going with a B, definitely a little bit above average. Now, no defense or spirit innately. She does have 15 AoE res innately. You can get 10 more on her own vision card, and you get some on the weapon that we'll see soon. And she's got no unit res innately, but you'll get 12 on her primary passive. So all intents and purposes, think of 15 and 12, definitely more than what most units get in the game in total. Definitely competitive with what newer units get, but she's got that above average HP level that ends up being around a B, all things considered. The survivability, I'm going with a B here though, and I need to be very careful how we contextualize this grade. She is an S tier anti-magic unit. Outside of that, kind of below average. So I'm going with a B here just to be practical about things. She's got a 35% damage reduction on, the bigger the AoE ability is, which does apply to physical stuff, so that's cool. She's got a 7,500 HP magic barrier. She can give herself shell. She's got 30 debuff weakening, and the supplicant buff on her sub job is AoE res, crit evade, light and dark res, so there's some other metrics there for the current meta. You can also have a passive that will extend buff durations by 1 turn, so you talk about above average duration of these buffs. That's certainly part of the survivability. The big thing though is that she has huge amounts of potential of reducing enemy magic damage, so much so that it has to be considered part of her survivability. We'll talk about those mechanics soon. The weapon is 8% reduced magic damage, or just flat at the end of the equation. That's hugely impactful, and similar to what VV has with the physical damage reduction, and 8 AoE res here as well. So overall, definitely above average for survivability, but definitely skewed more toward the magic side. Now damage, I'm going with a C here. She's only got 20 magic res pen innately and 40 spirit pen innately, and that comes on a passive. You can get those up an extra 10 from Truststone passives. Her main damaging ability is a pierce type spirit scaling damage, so that can catch people off guard. We've seen characters like Amneles do well with this. She only has 1 imperil. It's a single target, 20 unit res down. Certainly nice, but I wouldn't say like a game-changing magic damage difference. But I think overall, she's not going to blow you away with the amount of damage she does. It's average. It's good. It's fine. Now, but agility, I'm going with a C here too. When you consider that she has that passive equipped, she's right there at that average of 81. The accuracy, I'm going with a C plus here, even though she has the 20% accuracy passive. All things considered, she's definitely below the like A and B tiers of units and what they can typically hit by double digits. There's no guaranteed hit in her kit at all, so that's why you got to be a little careful about this accuracy. The evasion, going with a C here. Numerically, she's at that average, but realistically, definitely not necessarily an evade unit, but anything's possible. The movement, I'm going with a D here. No movement altering options whatsoever. And the auto ease of use, I'm going with an A here, because her main teammate buff is that HP magic barrier, so she does not run the risk of running in circles, rebuffing enemy or teammates on that first buff. But because of her range of 6, you have to kind of temper your expectations of how many buffs you can get off. And so overall, I think the AI is totally fine. The damage option she has, she can definitely min-max how she wants to do her damage. I don't think you have to worry terribly about that. But the game disruption, I can't emphasize this enough. A+. A+. Astounding meta unit for the moment. She is an excellent anti-magic niche. I would say arguably the best in the game. Will be a huge addition to countering recent metas. If you throw her on attack and you're seeing a bunch of enemies on defense and Guild War running Helenas and VVs, I have no doubt she'll be an instrumental part in giving you a much better advantage of clearing those teams, not only more reliably, but probably more effectively. But I want to hold on that thought for a second. Passives, I'm going with a B+ here. Lots of excellent, like, A-tier passives, but you can only pick 2. So that being said, I think there's some missed opportunities in what you could potentially equip. I'm going with a B+ here, but they are individually stellar passives. The counter abilities, I'm going with a D here. Very mundane counters. They're very pedestrian. Not at all what we see for 3rd anniversary units, but she's a 70 cost. That's expected. The overall job and kit, I'm going with a B+ here though, because she's got a concept of being an anti-magic unit. She kills it. Right down the middle does it perfectly. Excellent concept for what we're seeing in the game. She's a huge role player in that matchup, but as the game goes on, as things sway, as we get different map sizes and positioning and whatnot, I'm going with a B for an overall grade. Now, I really, again, have to reemphasize this. Game disruption right now in the short term, month, maybe 2 months, A+ unit. She is excellent. In the broad scheme of the game, though, going with a B. I really have questions on her practicality outside of any kind of magic meta. There's really nothing that she offers utility-wise if that's not the case. And so I won't call it niche because we're in a magic meta. How can you say that's niche? But when you just talk about all game practicality, and again, when you equip her agility passive, she's at the average. You can't get her above average agility with the passive. There's no movement altering option. So you talk about maps, there's nothing you can really do to change it other than a Tourmaline ring. So overall, like when you talk about putting her in a variety of situations, she comes with some demerits. So I'm going with a B here. I hope that's not misconstrued. She's a superb unit, and she will get a lot of use right now. But for the general thoughts, let's talk about why she's a 70 cost unit, some of those deficiencies. Right now, you know, the Spear Pen and the Magic Res Pen are definitely below average from what the barometer is for what most Magic characters get. The crit rate, non-existent, so you really lose all that damage upside. There's no healing power at all in her kit, despite the fact that she has a couple mechanics that rely on self-healing and absorbing damage, and she has 2 curative abilities, but no healing power in the kit to amplify those. She cannot 2-tick her heals in any kind of practical build, so she's very slow on those curative spells. The counter abilities, very mundane, as we said. There's no courage or re-raise or no removal of either of them. Obviously, that's a big checkbox that a lot of people look for. She's got no shell removal other than her vision card ability, but should you not have that on, that's one way to mitigate it. And there's no barrier break, so if you have a general barrier or an HP barrier, there's no way for her to get through that either. So there's some deficiencies there. That's why offensively, I also give her a C. There's some ways you can prevent that. But for the immense anti-magic upside here, I just can't emphasize how good she is in this regard. You get that 35%, which is above average for damage reduction on the larger the AoE it is. Her spear fall ability is reduce enemy magic res pen 40, so that's a huge damage decrease, and at the end of the damage formula, it reduces the entire amount by 30%, in addition to the AoE reduction here, in addition to shell, which is another 25% reduction. Not only that, you have confusion on here, you have a 7,500 HP magic barrier, and the 35% magic res, which means even on Helena the Black Rose's limit break, which is the minus 38%, you're not going to go 0 here, particularly if you have the debuff weakening on, which you will. So overall, fantastic anti-magic upside. Now, there's other great utility too. She can give shell to allies. The 120 ability she has is a general dispel, so dispel buffs, dispel haste, dispel damage, but I have questions on the AI, whether or not it will use it often. We'll see why soon. The supplicant buff has an excellent amount of attributes on it. It's a great diamond, very forgiving shaped AoE. There is some healing potential, even though I don't love it. It's nice that it's there. And she's got a sequence ability that can grant herself and teammate 40 defense and spear pen for 1 turn and absorb 30% of the damage done for 1 turn. So there's some fun utility there for the team. Now, she is an excellent mace addition to that class. They've really built out how many people are in there. Lightning gains a very, very valuable 70 cost unit that they did not have before. So for limited Guild War content, that's a big upgrade for that element. She does have a baitable diamond range of 6, though. I'm just pointing that out. It's the same thing as Helena the Black Rose, where you can theoretically get her to move forward faster than you would like normally. Her vision card that specifically came out for her gives her a lot more bulk that you really can't get otherwise, at least currently. It's 10% HP on the bestowed effect, 10 AoE res on the bestowed effect, and 30% HP in that main slot. Her survivability outside of magic, though, is suspect. It's only that 35% AoE damage reduction. There's the debuff weakening, which can apply to both damage types, but there's really no other physical damage mitigations. We saw that she doesn't have the general barrier. We saw the innate resistances percentage-wise aren't all that great. There's no counter abilities to really reduce any of the physical damage types. So I'm tempering expectations outside of the current usage. And very important to note, her AI looks to be 100% of a DPS AI, which is a deviation from some of the characters recently that where they have these sequence abilities that have curative potential. Soul comes to mind in particular, where they'll heal mid-fight. She will not. So that's a big upside for some characters that she does not get the benefit of. She will always attack regardless of what curative potential there is. So, moving on to the passive abilities, again, Special Little Something is a must equip here. 12 unit res, 12% agility, 35 reaction block rate. excellent, excellent passive. And Sharp Mind to me is the other must-have because you get that 40 Spirit Pen and the 20 accuracy. If you don't have the Spirit Pen here, that's a huge damage loss for her. The rest of these, though, they are really good. I mean, Wreath of Safety, 15 AoE res, awesome. Supplicant Intuition, the extension of the buff and debuff durations, awesome. I just don't see many practical applications outside of the top and bottom ones here. I'm not saying you're never going to use them. It's just that these are definitely the most consistent. And the counter abilities. Wonder Heal is the unique one they gave her. It's not unique. Everyone, for the most part, that are magic units has some variation of this. They just renamed it. The Charm Protection is kind of whatever, again, very average for what other characters have. And the Magic Commutation, you don't really need AP in her kit, so I don't think that's all that valuable either. Wonder Heal's okay, nothing special. But as we move to the main job buffs here, the Cheerful Resistance is her first priority, being that teammate buff. That's the Magic Barrier, that's the shell for herself and teammates, and the debuff weakening, very important for herself and allies. After that, you have the Magical Buildup, which is a 40% magic buff, very big, to get her started to the beginning of the fight. 25% agility, and is that giant AoE damage reduction of 35% for both physical and magic types. So these two buffs are superb. I really don't see opportunities to weave a TMR into here because I think the Supplicant sub-job also has a really good buff. But for now, we'll look at the main job here. All of these are reflectable. Keep that in mind for the Helena matchup. Befuddling Spearfall is the only one with a cast time, and it's way above average at a speed of 400. There's 2 AoEs, 2 unit-resistant ones. Punishment is a great low AP ability just to ensure the reduction of counter chance. The Befuddling Spearfall is really the bread and butter of her kit, though. That's that 25% confusion. It will reduce enemy magic damage done by 30% at the end of the damage formula. It's the magic res pen reduction of 40% also. And that's why I'm kind of conflicted with Dispelling Violet, which is the general disbuff here, which is excellent, but it's such a difference in modifier where you're looking at 220% versus 165%, and you're talking pierce type damage versus magic type damage. I don't see a ton of opportunities that she'll likely be using Dispelling Violet, so on paper, looks amazing. In-game impact, the jury's out to decide. But Magical Strike is also a really good ability here, where that's a unit in parallel of 20, and it has a follow-up ability where for herself and a teammate in this 3-square range, it will increase their defense and Spirit Pen by 40 for 1 turn, and absorb 30% of the damage done for 1 turn. So the nice thing about this is that, sure, maybe you can take off the passive of Sharp Mind, because you're going to get your Spirit Pen from here, but realistically speaking, you're likely going to be spamming Befuddling Spearfall instead of this, so I don't see a lot of upside from a damage perspective for this. It's just like the extra cherry on top, in my opinion. Now for the Limit Break, this is an excellent Limit Break. It's Select 2, absorbs 30% of the damage done. It's also a very strong chance to inflict slow. This is a fantastic Limit Break, but there's also a Vision Card ability that's on her Vision Card that is exceptionally noteworthy. It is the Pierce type attack that dispels Shell, and it's a triple hit. Very, very strong ability as well. Again, you look at what she has in her main job. Offensively, she can hit you a bunch of different ways with the unit scaling ones. As an Apparel, you have a Select 2, you have an AoE. There's a lot to really like. It's just that her penetration levels aren't to a level that I think you're going to blow people away, but the utility is certainly there. Now for the cast time breakpoints, this is very important. And the first thing to keep in mind, and this is my recommended one, a Truststone passive of 200, that is all you need. What I have here for abilities, Befuddling Spearfall we just saw. These Mystical Bind and Celestial Dyads are on the Subjobs, and these are her 2 curative spells on the bottom. The curative spells do not get impacted by a Truststone passive. That's for offensive abilities only. So, if you do this, all of her heal spells are 3 ticks, but this moves Befuddling Spearfall from 3 ticks down to 2 ticks, and the Subjob one here from 4 to 3. Either way, this is a huge breakpoint to get Befuddling Spearfall to 2. That's the most important thing here. If you were to equip a job passive, nothing really changes other than one of the sub-job breakpoints. Unless you equip both of the passives for cast time down, you will never get below 3 ticks for this healing ability, which is kind of a nice counterplay that, it's a weakness, if you will. If you went with an Esper, yeah, you can get Spearfall down to 1 tick, but I think this is compromising too much to get to there. So to me, the sweet spot is his top scenario where it's just a Truststone passive. You'll see that in my recommendation at the end. Now for the sub-jobs, Magi Striker does have a great heal ability here. It's a 210 mod on an AoE that also gives Slash and Magic Res. This is a very, very strong one considering she has no healing power, but again, 3 ticks to cast. Mystic Bind also is quite frankly a very good ability. You have 2 different status effects here on 185% mod. It's just, again, a question of priorities. Do you want Befuddling Spearfall, or do you want the Dispel, or do you want this? Realistically speaking, I don't see a ton of upside for this ability, but it's just a very, very good one. I see no reason why you couldn't keep this sub job on and use both of these abilities, because I think the only competitive other option is the Supplicant one where, yeah, there's a good argument to be had. Rite of Refuge is an immense buff here with that AoE res, the crit evade, all of that. We've seen how valuable that is on Shells. It misses some of the things that Shells has. Doesn't have the Protect or the AP restore, but you still get 4 really strong buffs here. Celestial Diet, I like, though, is another select 2 that you're not just limited to the limit break. This is also typeless attack, so if people are stacking a lot of lightning res, you can just bypass that with this ability. So I do like this option, and Supplication is not a bad one, but a much, much lower heal modifier, so I don't think there's nearly the upside of this curative potential that there is on the other one. So I have to play this character more, but I think it's a toss-up which one of these I like more. Quite honestly, they're both probably equally good. It's just map dependent, meta dependent, target dependent, all those things. Now the Rune Knight, I see this only for maybe PvE options with that Imperil of 38%. I don't think there's anything on here that's going to help her in any kind of auto PvP. Now for the TMR review, this is an S tier TMR. You're going to see a lot of people using this in my opinion. Not only do you have the 4 agility, it's double cast, defense, spirit, and HP on an accessory, which is very, very strong. The best thing about this is the range. It's not an adjacent buff to a teammate. It's got that distance of 2, so you can definitely play with some interesting setups to start a match here. If you have a bow tie on, you keep some spacing, and I love the creativity of this buffing range, and the ability itself is nothing to sneeze at either. It's 20 unit res for herself and the target, and the reason why I like this is because, you know, a lot of these characters don't innately have the ability to buff unit res. I know Renoa's TMR kind of can, similarly to this, and we haven't really seen that one get used all that much. So I think it's fair to think that the ability may not be used this much, but I like the stats on it nonetheless, and I like the buffing range. I think it's very unique. Now for the job-based division cards, Mace is in probably one of the best spots in the game with the amount of overlap it has with other cards. You know, not only does it have 2 different AoE res cards, it's got 2 different unit res cards, and it's got 3 agility cards across a variety of classes with a ton of overlap in spear, in fists, in dagger. There's a lot of rainbow teams that you can use here. And just visually, so you can kind of get a reminder of what these cards are, there's a lot of recent cards. So yeah, there's some power creep to be said in terms of the Melnia Vision card, the 2 Final Fantasy IX Vision cards, what they bring. And you'll see in my sample builds, it's really kind of an integral part of maximizing her. But there's still a lot of other great Vision cards here. Greater Demon is still an S-ranked card. There's a lot to like for what Mace can do in putting themselves into really any party to achieve the goal you're trying to get to. Now for the weapon optimization, I do think her weapon is the best one here. It's Pierce Attack and Magic Attack 15, so it applies to both. It's the magic damage reduction of 8% in addition to all the other magic reduction we already saw. Hugely impactful. The 8 AoE resistance certainly is nice too. I think just build the magic version of this and call it a day. I don't think this accuracy is nearly enough to make up for where she's at currently, but I think magic's fine. There is a comparable though with the Dawn Lantern, the regular Raph weapon, where there's some overlap here. It's also 8 AoE res. You get slightly more magic res pen, which is nice, but the healing power is only 5 more than a Truststone passive. This one's okay. I just think objectively speaking, it's not nearly as nice as this, other than maybe some of the extra magic res pen, but that's kind of subjective. And then the Zeus Mace. Not many people have this because it's the reliquary weapon that's very difficult, if not impossible, to auto all of those stages. From a pure damage perspective, I think this is likely the best staff, but I think her own staff is probably better just for the magic reduction and the extra AoE res. As we get into the sample builds, I have a lightning build, and then we're going to look at a mono mace build. And this lightning build is a 260 unit cost team, so this is one that you could see in limited Guild Wars. This is one that I'm really focusing on Alaya, really driving the team. I know there's a lot of Alaya counterplay, but we're kind of swinging between metas at the moment. Not all that strike res is still around. And so yeah, these yellow boxes are debatable. You could put other things in here, so I'm using the Scorpion Sentinel here for the extra attack percent for her and Charlotte. The coral one here is lightning attack for the party. It's required AP. I have the survival vest on Raph here just for the extra, defense to kind of well round her survival capabilities and the unit res, which is certainly nice. And then this TMR, realistically, I think her TMR is a really good one here. I would turn it off because I think the buffs in her kit are better, but this is really here for the extra agility overall and making sure that when you put the Truststones on her, sorry, small typo, this is a spirit set, you want to align the spirit stats with whatever TMR you have. So that's why that TMR is picked there. The other set is the agility one. It's magic 20%, reduced cast time 200, 20 reaction block, and 10 healing power, and then 10 magic res pen and 10 spirit pen. So I think this is the sweet spot for Truststones. And when you look at the total stats here, 9,300 HP, 22 defense, 28 spirit. The magic does look a little low at 1325. 117 agility is definitely nice though for a unit that is average agility, if you will. You get 47 unit res, 53 AoE res as well, up to 50% magic res in this build. And then just from a modifier and offensive output perspective, you have 83 lightning attack. That's definitely higher than a rainbow team, but I have some counterpoints to that, and 50 spirit pen and 30 magic res pen. So overall, this is like what I would generally expect for a lightning team that's trying to go up against, I don't know, anything in limited guild wars. I still think Elia is probably the best lightning offensive unit in that element, and I think Charlotte has a case to be made versus Alphonse at the moment in terms of what she does, just well-roundedness. But if we look at the mono mace team, this is one, yes, I'm using Dagger again in this rainbow team, but if you consider Winter Raph, regular Raph, the vision cards obviously all different here, where I have Raph's own vision card on here. This definitely changes some of her metrics. I have the Zidane card here, which is the 10 unit res. You could put Odin here for the old school Odin for that same 20 unit res. That's really the only reason that it's there. The VV card is a massive buff to this class though. This Hollow Vision card cannot be understated, its impact. The Subvision cards, you have a couple different agility ones you could pick from. I know that technically the Melnia card also could be here in the main slot because that also has unit res, or you could put the Melnia in the sub slot here, or Greater Demon. I prefer Greater Demon just for this team. And I intentionally picked a little bit of a niche card here, which JB and I on our podcast, we ranked the job-based vision cards. The Sun-Speckled Encounter was a very D-tier niche one. This is one that I think actually has some application where it's got 8 magic res and it's got some strike res in that sub slot so that Raph, who is naturally negative to strike, can gain some resistance. Same thing for the magic percent. I kept the rest of the equipments the same. Same thing with the Truststones, that's all the same. I really just wanted to highlight the difference in stats though when you consider this different setup of vision cards. Her HP, much higher at just over 10,000 HP. Defense and Spirit are about the same. Unit and AoE res are about the same, but the magic stat jumps up to almost 1,700. She's still at 114 agility. She also gains 36 elemental chain res. Yes, the lightning attack takes a big dip going from that like 80s modifier down to a 25, but you're correspondingly getting a pretty giant magic bump here, which kind of offsets some of that. So all things considered, this is a bulkier version of Raph than the one we just saw. But this is, if you're hunting pure magic teams, I think this is a super viable one to take into that matchup. Now, just the last honorable mention, those Truststones. Left side, I would say HP, Spirit, or Defense. I would absolutely keep the sleep res of 25% on here, though, to get her to 75% innately. That will near guarantee that you'll never be slept by the enemy Helena. It's not impossible that it doesn't happen. If all 3 of you are in a AoE and she hits all 3 of you, I think it's still a 20% chance to proc, but otherwise, you're basically resisting it. The right side here, though, we already just saw in the builds. I'm pretty happy with all 6 of these. You could go for lightning attack or accuracy, but I really don't like subbing any of these ones out. I think all of these are really important for it, but that's my recommendations, at least for now, for the Truststones. And that's my thoughts on Winter Raph in a nutshell. There is so much to cover. I tried to keep this as condensed as possible. This is an excellent unit introduced into the game at the moment. No doubt it's going to be a very valuable tool, particularly even when for Astrius of the Past comes out, who is a great sword user that is on her vision card in terms of aligning from a job perspective. A fellow lightning unit, so there's some overlap there from the other lightning cards. But I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of good value from her in the short term. We obviously just wait to see what happens as the metas continue to shift in the coming weeks and months, where now we have a much shorter roadmap to see what JP comes out with. But that's my thoughts for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you soon.